It's 5 a.m. in New York City. Good morning. I'm Danny Berger with your Bloomberg Brief. Bonnie Quinn on assignment this week. Here's what you need to know. A global chip sell-off. Stocks extend losses as semis erase $500 billion in value over concerns of lofty valuations. And it was winner's night for the Democrats. The party sweeps major party elections, with Zohran Mamdani taking the mayoral victory in New York City. And the legality of President Trump's tariffs face a Supreme Court hearing later this morning. The president says that he will not be attending. It was a serious pain trade in the markets yesterday. The S&P ended down more than 1% for its worst day in nearly 1 month. We add a little bit of weight to the losses this morning, down 1/10 and down 0.2% for the NASDAQ 100. AMD earnings not helping us this morning. It does seem like the valuation concerns have shifted into a new tone for this market. Does it continue? We're looking at a Russell that is gaining. Now, with those concerns, for example, we also saw IG spreads widen. Bitcoin dropped below 100,000 for the first time since the summer. And you've seen bonds rally. That continues at least on the front end ever so slightly this morning. Your 2-year yield stands at 3.56. Your 10-year yield at 4.0832. Let's get some stocks on the move in the pre-market this morning. With that is Chloe Melly. Good morning, Chloe.
Good morning, Danny. Let's start with AMD today. So AMD actually reported third quarter sales that beat estimates, but the reason why it's down in pre-market trading is because the fourth quarter outlook really disappointed investors. The problem here for AMD is that expectations were so sky high that anything less than massively impressive would have been seen as underwhelming. Moving on, but staying within the AI theme, the providers of AI equipment, AI infrastructure, Arista and Supermicro are also down this morning after providing quite lackluster forecasts. It puts into question perhaps the ability of those companies to continue to capitalize on the AI boom going forward. And finally, Pinterest is also down in pre-market this morning after projecting quite weak sales for the fourth quarter, which includes this upcoming holiday season. Of course, it's a company that's dealing with growing competition from AI and also slowdown in advertising spend. So it doesn't look too rosy for Pinterest at the moment.
Ooh, yeah, that's a painful drop, 19%. Chloe, thank you very much. We'll catch up with you later in the hour. Also, in just moments, we'll speak with Katrina Dudley of Franklin Templeton as tech valuation fears drag markets down for a second day. But first, here in New York City, a historic victory for Zohran Mamdani.
If anyone can show a nation betrayed by Donald Trump how to defeat him, it is the city that gave rise to him. This is not only how we stop Trump, it's how we stop the next one. So, Donald Trump, since I know you're watching, I have 4 words for you. Turn the volume up.
Joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Mika Solner of Bloomberg Government. Mika, thanks for getting up early for us after a late night. What did the results show?
Yes, thank you for having me. I think the results showed that there is an extreme call by the Democratic Party to really mobilize their voters, and that showed last night. We saw a huge sweep for Democrats last night. In New York City specifically, I think that Zohran Mamdani really was the product of a lot of Democratic pushback in terms of them saying the party has not done enough. And I know that he has big sweeping promises that he's made on the campaign trail, and we'll have to see how those come to fruition.
And as he was speaking, Zohran Mamdani, that is, Trump tweeted or put on Truth Social this, ... and so it begins. This is a president who has threatened to pull funding from New York City if Mamdani wins. We have that win. What now, Mika?
Yeah, as we've seen before, President Trump is not afraid to go into cities that he disagrees with the leadership of. We saw the federal takeover of Los Angeles, of Washington, D.C., and I think that he's unafraid to go into his former hometown of New York City as well. But I do think Mamdani is going to really be aggressive in his fight against the Trump administration. I think that was one of his main criticisms of the Democratic Party and why he was elected with such a progressive base.
So you have Mamdani maybe being a referendum on something very specific in New York City. But as you pointed to, Mika, it was also in New Jersey and Virginia that the Democrats had sweeping wins, too. How much can we infer from that for next year's off-season elections, too? Is there something wider happening here, a pushback against the Republican Party incumbents?
I think it's a little bit too early to tell, but I do think that the Democratic base specifically is extremely mobilized right now. They're very motivated against Trump. I think in New Jersey and Virginia, we have seen more moderate candidates pull through. So there's always also going to be a push-pull in the Democratic Party in terms of what the correct vision is going to be for the playbook. And that's also going to vary by state and by district next year.
So, okay, you have those elections, but the other thing that was on the ballot, at least for California, was redistricting. Mika, this is a battle that's been ongoing, whether it be Texas really being the first to put that through on the Republican side, California responding by passing Prop 50 to get 5 more seats in the representatives. How is this all shaking out?
The redistricting fight is something that's been unprecedented, and this was started by President Trump that wanted red states to try and draw new maps to get more red seats. So I think that this is, another sign of Democrats pushing back against Trump. And I think that they're going to be looking, if California was successful, they're going to be looking, continue to be aggressive in other states as well. So we're going to see a lot of election shakeup here, and we're going to see what can get done in the next year before 2026.
Just to be clear, Mika, with these added seats from California, does it essentially negate what's happening in Texas or what happened in Texas? Are we back to where we were before?
That's the pitch that was sold by proponents of Prop 50 and Democrats that have pushed for it, is saying that it evens the playing field. And how that's going to shake up, we're going to have to see. I think that a lot of the candidates in these seats that are going to be affected are going to be running independent races, and we're just going to have to see what they do with the odds stacked against them.
Hey, Mika, appreciate your time this morning. That's Bloomberg Government's Mika Solner in D.C. Meanwhile, in Washington, the Supreme Court will hear challenges on the legality of some of President Trump's tariffs today after the lower court ruled them illegal under an emergency law. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Suzanne Lynch. Suzanne, what are we likely to hear today as we go through the court process on IEEPA and President Trump's tariffs?
Well, these oral arguments are scheduled to begin at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and it's going to be a fascinating insight into the nation's highest court and its views on Trump's tariff power. At issue is the 1977 Federal Act that Trump used to impose some of those sweeping tariffs that we have seen since he returned to office. Now, lower courts have ruled against this. This is the Supreme Court now stepping in. Interestingly, we believe that the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, will attend. Donald Trump had indicated he might attend, but he will not. But we will see Bessent there at the court.
Meanwhile, Suzanne, at midnight, officially, it became the longest shutdown in history, reaching day 36. For those of us who have flights, me, myself included today, it really has made an impact. But the markets, it hasn't made an impact. Hasn't made an impact in Washington, D.C. Do we seem any closer to resolving the government shutdown?
I think at the moment the answer to that is no. We are not seeing any obvious off-ramps now for either Republicans or Democrats on this. Donald Trump has managed in one way to distance himself from this issue, although we do expect him to meet Republican senators today. But there is no sense that this impasse is getting any closer to being resolved. Democrats are digging in. But you mentioned flights there. I think that may well be the issue that spurs some kind of action here. That indeed was the issue that eventually ended the previous longest shutdown, which also took place under Trump's watch. But we are seeing indications now of various workers not calling into work because they're being unpaid. This is having an impact on some flights. Obviously, we are coming into a very busy period as we approach Thanksgiving. So I think this is weighing on lawmakers' minds. Democrats may feel emboldened after those victories we were just speaking about last night. But the question is, who is going to get the political blame for this? At the moment, polls suggest that more people blame Republicans. But the longer this goes on, we're probably going to see some calls, even from unions, those traditional Democrat leaning voters calling for something to be done to stop this shutdown now, as it breaks a record for the longest shutdown in American history.
And you've certainly seen some of the polls moving away from the Republicans and from Donald Trump himself. So opinion does seem to be placing the blame on the Republicans. Suzanne, thank you very much. Bloomberg's Suzanne Lynch. Back to markets this morning. A global sell-off in chip stocks accelerated on concerns over lofty valuations for some of the AI boom's biggest winners. Bloomberg Tech Europe anchor Tom McKenzie joins us with the latest. Tom, let's just take stock of what happened yesterday. Has gravity finally hit some of the AI-related names?
Well, it did, at least for 24 hours. And you're right, it has been global. You've seen that in terms of the Asian session. You saw the likes of SK Hynix. You saw the likes of Samsung, TSMC over in Taiwan taking a big hit as well. And in fact, here in Europe right now, in terms of the biggest losses coming through, it's the sector around tech that is seeing some of the biggest losses. So it is global in nature. Are there some changes? You know, we know, we've been discussing the valuation story and the nosebleed valuations for some of these companies for a long time. That is not new. Maybe some factors that are new this time round are, of course, just where we are on the spend story and some of the circular financing, as some would characterize it, around the hyperscalers. Then the expectation that maybe the Fed doesn't cut again in December, so maybe an environment of higher rates and how that could play out. And then, of course, key executives on Wall Street, the likes of David Solomon of Goldman Sachs, warning about a potential pullback in stocks, and Michael Burry putting those short positions on Nvidia and Palantir. So all of that seeming to come together to be a factor that dragged on those semiconductor and tech names yesterday, particularly on semiconductors. You look at the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, about $500 billion worth of market cap being wiped out just in the session on Wall Street yesterday. It had been trading at a premium, about 28 times forward earnings, which is well above its 5-year average. It's more like 22. So for those looking at that disconnect between valuations and the ability to push through with earnings, that is another metric that would cause concern. And AMD as well. Look, beating on profits, beating on sales, beating on the forward look around revenues, but not meeting the highest expectations. So again, Danny, I know something you scrutinised a lot is that gap between expectations and what they're actually able to deliver.
Yeah, I mean, it's two of these big lofty names in a row, from AMD to Palantir, that couldn't live up to expectations. But Tom, what does it say about the broader story of AMD and their ability to really rival NVIDIA as a producer of these AI-related equipments and chips?
Yeah, and they've had success on that front. They've had significant partnerships announced in the last few weeks with OpenAI to supply them with chips, of course. So that is a vote, an endorsement, of course, coming through with OpenAI for AMD and their AI accelerators. They had a vote of confidence from Oracle as well. So they are making progress, but the catch-up is still significant in terms of the gap between NVIDIA, which still has close to a 90% market share when it comes to those cutting-edge AI accelerators. Again, AMD making progress, significant partnerships. Interestingly, when it comes to the data center part of the business, which is the AI part of the business for AMD, they saw a 22% increase in growth, but for their more legacy computer CPU part of the business, they actually saw a more than 70% pickup in growth. So that's interesting in terms of the dynamic between the legacy business performing much better, in fact, than the AI business. In the context, of course, that growth of 22% is still very strong, but many investors, or at least some, looking for even stronger growth and pushing the CEO, Lisa Su, on that. She still says by 2027, this is going to be generating tens of billions of dollars of additional revenue for this business.
Tom, we are also going to get Qualcomm reporting after the market closed. What are you watching out for there?
They are also inevitably trying to push into the AI space, trying to develop and design chips that will fit into data centers. They still get the vast majority of the revenues from chips that go into smartphones, both Android and Apple, with the modems as well. Interestingly, Apple's come through obviously with some pretty strong numbers in terms of growth, particularly around the iPhone 17, but Apple is now less dependent on Qualcomm modems because they've got their own in-house modem. So it's really the Android story that is going to align with Qualcomm. So you're looking for that, looking for anything they have to say on how much progress they're making in developing their own AI chips as well. They've also been pushing into the auto space, so that's crucial. They're trying to diversify away from smartphones. So any updates in terms of the progress they're making on those fronts, I think will be front and center for investors exposed to Qualcomm.
Tom, we appreciate it. That is Bloomberg Tech Europe anchor Tom McKenzie. Now let's get you some other top stories that are trending on the terminal this morning. And China ends retaliatory tariffs on U.S. agricultural products. That list includes soybeans, corn, wheat, sorghum, and chicken. This comes after the U.S. halved its fentanyl-related levies on Chinese goods. It will take effect on November 10th. And a UPS freight jet crashed and exploded shortly after takeoff from Louisville, Kentucky on Tuesday, killing 3 crew members and at least 4 people on the ground. The cause of the crash has not yet been identified. Boeing said it has offered to work with the NTSB on investigation. And BMW says demand for its new EVs is exceeding expectations. It's seeing particularly strong demand in Europe, but facing fierce competition in China. It warned that earnings could be hit by changes in tariff policy or Chinese export curbs on key materials. Coming up, Novo cuts outlook once again, highlighting obesity struggles. We'll bring our interview with the new CEO, Mike Dowstar. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg. You're watching Bloomberg Brief. I'm Danny Berger in New York. Novo Nordisk has trimmed its forecast for the 4th time this year after disappointing sales of its blockbuster weight loss drug. Bloomberg's Guy Johnson spoke to the company's new CEO. Take a listen.
The first 9 months of the year, 15% sales growth and 10% profit growth is not so bad at all compared to our peers. But I think that when you look at it quarter by quarter, there has been a headwind and bringing the quarterly growth rates lower. If you project our numbers for the full year, actually you see that quarter 4 should be in negative territory. So that you see mathematically.
So this isn't the low point. The low point is still to come, but things get better from there?
There's for sure a headwind against us. Having said this, we are in a business of marathons and not sprints. So there is huge amount of unmet need with many patients still not on our medications or not on any medications. And I look incredibly forward, of course, as we go forward, taking over this new job, making sure that we expand the market and get to those people.
You've been in the job for 91 days. You haven't let the grass grow under your feet. You're already talking about cost cuts. You will talk about it in a minute. You've launched a big M&A deal. Is this the new Novo? Is this a more dynamic, aggressive Novo Nordisk under your tenure?
The success we have had with obesity has meant that a lot of companies, pretty much all pharma companies out there, has gotten excited about what we do. So that is good from a patient's perspective. More players will come in.
What about a shareholder perspective?
But at the same time, we have to make sure we can outperform the competition from a shareholder perspective. So my job is to really make sure that we are ready for the headwind that we clearly are seeing coming towards us.
When are you going to match Eli Lilly in terms of performance? They had results a few days ago. They were knockout. When are you going to be able to match that kind of performance? You talk about a kind of a performance culture here.
Again, my job is to put the patient in the center of what I do and not necessarily just my competitor. We watch them. We take all of our competitors seriously. But there are hundreds of millions of people out there that are suffering from diabetes and obesity that no one is right now addressing. My job is to sustainably lead ourselves towards that aim.
How does Metsera help you do that?
Metsera has some of the best complementary assets to our own phenomenal pipeline. So when the ambition is in billions and not millions, you need basically all the great assets to get.
Great assets, but complementary. So, so why do you need complementary assets? Because you've got all these products. Why do you need to go and buy this business?
Because obesity and diabetes is not a single disease. It's an individual disease. You basically have different preferences. Take a look at the great Wegovy pill we're about to launch in US. Well, that's for people that don't like injection. They would like to lose weight, but they don't have a viable offering from us or the competitors.
You've got very similar products. And the question that I've just listened to a lot of analysts, talked to a lot of analysts, and the question they keep coming up with is, does this seem to signal maybe that you don't believe in the current Novo portfolio?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We are in a situation where every single patient has a different preference. And we need to have the product offering that matches that.
Bloomberg's Guy Johnson with the new CEO of Novo Nordisk. Coming up, the Democrats sweep the local elections. That covered in the major news outlets. We'll have your front pages for you next. You're watching Bloomberg Brief. Welcome back to Bloomberg Brief. I'm Danny Berger in New York. Time for the story that's making headlines across various front pages. Everywhere you look, It's about the one big win for Democrats. The party registered victory in contests across states. That means that they're now building momentum into the 2026 midterms. In a series of historic firsts, Zohran Mamdani will be the New York City's first Muslim mayor and first South Asian to hold the office. He'll be sworn in on January 1st. Abigail Spanberger will become Virginia's first female governor, and Mickey Sherrill will become New Jersey's first female Democratic governor. Coming up, more on this sell-off. How much further can it go, or will a rebound be on its way as we continue to dip in today's future session? We're going to have more on stocks and valuations with Katrina Dudley of Franklin Templeton. That's coming up next. You're watching Bloomberg. It's 5:30 a.m. in New York City. Good morning. I'm Danny Berger with your Bloomberg Brief. Here's what you need to know. A global chip sell-off. Stocks extend losses as semis erase $500 billion in value on concerns over lofty valuations. Winner's night for the Democrats. The party sweeps major local elections, with Zohran Mamdani taking the mayoral victory in New York City. And the legality of President Trump's tariffs face a Supreme Court hearing later this morning. The president has said that he will not be attending. Well, it's 24 hours and continues of a clear risk-off move. Maybe not as bad as it was yesterday, falling by more than 1%, but it is the concerns over high valuations that seem to be hitting equities after Palantir earnings 2 days ago. Yesterday, it was AMD earnings that has the NASDAQ 100 underperforming, down 0.3. For your bond market, it was a flight to safety. That old chestnut came back. It takes a breather this morning with across the curve. We are little changed. Your 10-year yield standing at 4.0871. Let's get you some stocks moving underneath the surface. Here with that is Chloe Melly. Hey, Chloe.
Good morning, Danny. Let's start with AMD, which is down this morning after providing a fourth quarter sales forecast that disappointed investors, despite third quarter sales actually coming in ahead of expectations. This is part of that broader tech sell-off, all of those concerns around the really lofty valuations as well in those AI-related stocks. So we are down this morning for AMD. Staying within a similar theme, the providers of AI infrastructure, Arista and Supermicro, are also down after providing quite lackluster guidance, which raises those questions around whether or not they're able to capitalize on this growing AI spend. And finally, Pinterest is down also a very impressive 19%, 18.4% after projecting quite weak sales for the fourth quarter, which includes this holiday season that's very important for them. It's a company that's facing a lot of challenges, including slowing down in advertising, and that is reflected in those shares today.
I'm sure the executives at Pinterest would not call that drop impressive, Chloe. Chloe, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Now, as Chloe mentioned, there does seem to be pockets where valuation fears have been gripping investors. It's a second day, potentially, of a sell-off. We'll see how things change as we get closer to the market open. But it does feel like a reassessment of an AI-driven bull market. But there's been a lot of bullishness. Of the 92 major global equity gauges tracked by Bloomberg, more than a third were within 1% of their respective records last week. That is the highest since the global financial crisis, when the metric peaked around 40%. Joining us now, I'm pleased to say, is Katrina Dudley, Senior Investment Strategist at Franklin Templeton. Katrina, wonderful to see you this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Great, thank you.
Is there a degree where just the gains that we've seen across different indexes just make us more vulnerable at this part to days like yesterday?
I think you're exactly right. Look, the market is not heading in a straight line up and to the right. There are going to be times where you have pockets of correction, and those pockets and those opportunities are really what we're seeing as an opportunity to add to equity exposure. So to take advantage of the fact that the market may sell off on what we see as a very positive earnings trajectory. And going back to the valuation question, I think that's really what's on everyone's mind at the moment. Look, valuations versus history are above where they've been historically. But if you look at on a forward-looking basis, that gap starts to narrow between the average multiple and where we're trading. And I think what that really is a reflection of is earnings power. So if we look at the companies that have missed, if you look at AMD that we just spoke about, it was an earnings miss. It was a miss versus expectations. And it's earnings that drive markets. It's not valuation.
It feels like it's been very volatile when it comes to earnings. Is that just a factor of rallying up to this point? Or have we kind of mismatched on where fundamentals actually stand versus what the companies are reporting, even though, to your point, the earnings have been strong, but the reactions kind of have been negative?
That's interestingly, because 80% of companies have beat earnings expectations. So companies are actually beating what people are expecting, and the stocks are still not reacting as you would expect. So that is what is driving that volatility, is that expectations have got ahead of themselves. So companies are beating expectations. And if you're a CEO and you're sitting in that CEO suite, you deliver more than people were expecting and your stock still sells off. It's very difficult to explain it where people are delivering. And I think that there's two factors that make us very positive. First, that a rate of earnings beats, which I think is driving an acceleration in earnings. And the second is this AI and what we think it's going to happen, and in terms of the breadth of all of the companies impacted by AI. It's not just 7 stocks that are driving this market.
So when you say you're looking at some of the declines as opportunities to add, are you specifically looking at opportunities to add in those AI names, or are you taking sort of any broad market decline to add more broadly to equity exposure?
I think what we are looking at is a combination of the two, is adding to your equity exposure and then really assessing on a stock-by-stock basis. I think as the market has broadened out, there's just so many more opportunities available to people who are willing to do the work and to pick those stocks. We do continue to see opportunities in the technology sector. That is where you're seeing a lot of growth. But I think what the market is also ignoring is the fact that across many different industries, we're seeing positive earnings growth, and that is good for the market. That breadth gives you a kind of solid foundation on which to be optimistic.
Earnings breadth, but not breadth for the overall market. One of the remarkable things, and our producer Dan Curtis pointed this out, that in yesterday's decline of 1%, more stocks were rallying than Monday's rally of 0.2%. The breadth on rally days has been extremely bad. It's just those few lofty stocks that are carrying us there. Is that a concern to you?
I think, though, on the other side of things, that the rest of the market is much more stable. So the volatility is happening in those larger parts of the market. So I think as you look at where a stable foundation is, I think that what we're seeing is the average company is doing better than average, and that's a really good thing for this market.
Katrina, just turning to policy from the Fed, we've had speakers in recent days say that they're not sure whether December will be a lock or not, and we just witnessed, yes, very localized elections, only a few states, but it felt like inflation, or at least the cost of living, was very much so on the docket. And you had voters who voted against the incumbent party on that. Are we going to face an issue if this is a Fed, especially next year with a new composition, that is cutting and a populace that still seems concerned with high prices?
Look, I do think inflation, cost of living, cost of housing are some of the key things that are really driven, what the election results. Just look here in New York City, where the need for that housing, though, is really a question about the supply of housing, and the supply of housing that is affordable. I happen to sit on the board of a nonprofit that does make available housing that is affordable to the general population, and it's releasing the brakes that have made those projects very difficult to get through. And so I'm actually quite optimistic with the new administration that you may actually see more of these projects get permissioned, and that will increase the supply of housing. And increasing the supply will actually make it more affordable and make it easier for New Yorkers to get into a housing and have that stability in areas where they want to live. So that's the first thing in terms of that Democratic sweep. I also think that a lot of those votes were anti-votes versus necessarily a positive vote.
When it comes to housing, because it's a problem across major cities, right? And it's something that other cities haven't been able to solve, from Chicago to New York to San Francisco. If your hope plays out, that you do get some of the red tape removed and supply comes back on the market, could it serve as an example nationally? Does positive developments in New York pretend well for the entirety of the United States that is struggling with higher housing prices.
Isn't this such interesting? In the last 2 decades, we've gone from having an overabundance of housing and people were sending back their keys in the mail.
It's the financial crisis, right? That really discouraged a lot of the home builders from diving in and building more supply.
Exactly. And so what we're seeing now is, the return of multifamily housing in particular, which is a more affordable, form of housing. We're also seeing people wanting to get housing that's closer to transportation versus being really on the outskirts. And I do think that if you have a model where we can convert, sites that maybe weren't intended to be housing but actually have all of the right attributes, that is a good sign. And it is just finding a model that works. I think that each of the cities is probably going to have a slight derivative because there's just so many unique characteristics. And I think that's the one tough thing about housing. It is probably the one asset class that is just really unique.
Yeah, and it also speaks to the moment where Fed cuts aren't necessarily helping the housing market. You have to have the supply reforms that you're talking about.
Exactly, and that supply reform is what's going to give people hope because they're going to see the fact that there's more availability, and availability is going to drive that optimism. But you also raised the question, and we talked about it a little bit, about the Fed and the rate cut expectations. And it's interesting because as we went into October, we got the rate cut, but some of that commentary coming out of that meeting, people actually readjusted their expectations for December. It was, as you say, it was a slam dunk in basketball, and now that probability is down to about 60%. People are thinking that the Fed is going to continue to be cautious, and that caution, I think, has a reflection on the fact that they are cautious about inflation.
Katrina, this has been so fascinating. It is always such a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for coming on this morning. Katrina Dudley of Franklin Templeton. Coming up, as we were just speaking about a historic election in New York City, Mamdani is elected mayor in a big night for the Democrats. We'll give you the results coming up next on your Bloomberg Brief.
If anyone can show a nation betrayed by Donald Trump how to defeat him, it is the city that gave rise to him. This is not only how we stop Trump, it's how we stop the next one. So, Donald Trump, since I know you're watching, I have 4 words for you. Turn the volume up.
For what it's worth, it does seem Trump was watching in the middle of that speech he put out on Truth Social, and so it begins. That was Zohran Mamdani making history after winning the New York City mayoral election in one of the most competitive races the city had seen in decades. Mika Solner of Bloomberg Government joins us now from Washington, D.C. Mika, just how big of a victory was this for Mamdani? Was it similar to what we saw in the early polling?
Yes, this was an extremely well-run campaign and well-funded campaign, and one that was a very huge success for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And we saw, that Zohran Mamdani has become not only a threat to Republicans, but a threat to some Democrats in his own party as well, if you look at the money that was spent against him and his rise. But this should send a sure sign to Republicans in Washington that, they should be afraid ahead of the midterms next year.
And as we've been speaking about, President Trump has been threatening to pull funding to New York City if Mamdani wins. Mika, just how much could the president do? How difficult could he make Zohran Mamdani's life as mayor of New York City?
I think that we're going to see a huge struggle between New York City and Zohran Mamdani's New York City in particular, and President Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump has been proven that he is not afraid to go into cities and use the federal power that he has to go into places run by Democrats and make sure that they know that he's the one that's in charge. And I think that he has a unique aspect in doing that. So I think that we'll see no shortage of that here.
It wasn't just New York City. There were also races for the governor in New Jersey and Virginia. Mika, what did those results show?
I think the New Jersey and Virginia results are particularly interesting because those Democratic candidates ran a more moderate campaign. So I think that we will see a push-pull between the progressive wing of the party and the more centrist wing of the Democratic Party in terms of how they want to message next year. And again, I will add that I think this is going to vary district by district and state by state, but we are going to continue to see this messaging fight in the party itself.
And how do they message California passing Prop 50, giving them more seats in a redistricting drawing for the House of Representatives?
Yeah, Prop 50 was largely successful last night, and Democrats and proponents of Prop 50 billed it as a way to level the playing field in the redistricting fight that was started by Trump, who went into pushed red state legislatures to try and draw new maps ahead of next year. And I think that is a sign that Republicans are fearful of holding on and losing their small majority, but also Democrats are wanting to make sure that they can win in a playing field that is leveled.
Mika, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Mika Solner of Bloomberg Government. Now, elsewhere in Washington, D.C., President Trump's tariffs are facing their biggest test yet as the Supreme Court is scheduled to hear arguments on their legality starting at 10 a.m. Eastern time. The lower courts did rule them illegal under an emergency law. Joining us from Washington, D.C., as well as Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. Tyler, what are we expecting in today's arguments?
Yeah, hey, Danny, good morning. Well, these tariffs have to do with the ones invoked under IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and it extends to about 60% of the tariffs currently in place by the Trump administration. And there's two big legal questions at the heart of this case. One is, does President Trump have the authority under IEEPA to impose tariffs? This law has never been used before in such a way, and there are questions here on whether or not he bypassed Congress. The second big question is that in order to invoke IEEPA, President Trump had to declare national emergencies. He did so twice, one citing the border and fentanyl to impose those tariffs on China, Mexico, and Canada, and then again for his so-called reciprocal tariffs, where he cited persistent trade imbalances as a national emergency. Now, if the court rules that President Trump does have this legal authority, then the questions become whether or not these national emergencies reach the legal standard of being unusual and extraordinary threats that he would have to take this step and invoke the emergency powers. There's a lot of things that we're looking for here, Danny, but importantly, it could have some pretty sweeping implications. Our own analysts at Bloomberg Economics say that if the ruling goes against the Trump administration, it could drop the average U.S. effective tariff rate from 14.5% down to 6.5%.
Elsewhere, Tyler, we've also, as of midnight, entered day 36 of the government shutdown, a new milestone on the dysfunction of Washington, D.C., with the longest shutdown on record. Has there been any movement to reopen the government?
Well, we have gotten perhaps a glimmer of hope. We heard from Senate Majority Leader John Thune, who said that a potential off-ramp seems to be coming together. But importantly, this is very fragile, and it doesn't seem like the conversations have extended to the leadership level yet. But our understanding is there is a bipartisan group of rank-and-file senators that are discussing some potential solutions that would likely include a promised vote on extending the Affordable Care Act premium tax subsidies that are set to expire at the end of this year. That has really been at the core of Democrats' demands. They want to see some changes made, some promises before the government reopens, but Republicans have been holding the line that the government needs to reopen in order for any of those talks to take place. So perhaps the compromise can be that they will set a firm date on the calendar for a vote on the extension. We're going to have to wait and see because, Danny, as you well know, pressure is mounting, everything from delays at airports due to a shortage of unpaid air traffic controllers to now open enrollment starting and Americans seeing their premiums go up, to the future of SNAP benefits, which have really been at the center of this fight, as there are questions still about how much money Americans that receive these food aid benefits are going to get.
Tyler, thank you so much for your coverage this morning. Looking forward to your coverage throughout programming today. That is Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. Now back to markets, where a global chip sell-off wiped out $500 billion in combined market capitalization. Bloomberg Tech Europe anchor Tom McKenzie is back with us. And Tom, that comes as earnings for the most part have been beating for the overall equity index, an 82% beat rate for these S&P 500 companies. Why then has tech and semiconductors performed so poorly so far this week?
Yeah, Danny, I mean, part of it seems to be that expectations piece again. And as you say, AMD, as one example, beating when it comes to profits, beating when it comes to sales, and beating when it comes to the forecast for revenues from the current quarter. But that was on average estimates in terms of what the analysts had been looking for at the punchier end of some of those takes and some of those estimates from the analysts. AMD did not meet the punchier ends. It met the average estimate, but not some of the really kind of far-flung expectations. And so it's that mismatch, again, that seems to be one of the factors that's feeding into this. But you know, the people we're speaking to today suggest that it's not just one aspect that's feeding into the downside that we saw yesterday when it comes to tech, that rippled across to Asia and now to Europe as well. It is also maybe concern that rates will be kept higher for longer if the Fed doesn't go with another cut in December. Of course, that remains a big question mark. We know that meeting is going to be live. And also some of the short positions we saw from Mike Burry and some of the warnings that came through from some of those key executives on Wall Street. All of that coming together. Of course, the government shutdown maybe is the broader negativity as well as we get into that 36th day. Maybe all of that coming together, leading some to question the valuation story, even as the earnings beat from most of these companies. It was a beat, of course, from Palantir. It was a beat from AMD, but not doing enough really to meet investor expectations, given the significant run-up. AMD up about 100% year to date. And on the valuation story, you talked about the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index trading before that drawdown, trading at about a multiple of about 28 forward earnings, well above the 5-year average of 22. So that just illustrates, for some at least, how far valuations have run away from some of the fundamentals, even as these companies beat on earnings.
Hey, Tom, can we just sit on AMD for just a minute? Because this is a company that has been trying to rival that of NVIDIA. Did it seem to make any progress in its latest earnings?
You have to look at the numbers and say, yes, they have made progress. Again, given the beat and given the guidance on the current quarter, they have, of course, inked pretty significant deals with OpenAI and others in the space. And I think what that tells you is that they're making progress not just on the chipsets, but on the whole package that comes with their AI accelerators. They are still absolutely playing catch up with the likes of NVIDIA. Lisa Su, though, saying when pushed on this, by 2027, they should be adding tens of billions of additional annual revenue from their AI accelerator sales.
Tom, thank you very much. That is Bloomberg Tech Europe anchor Tom McKenzie. Coming up on the show as we head closer to the market open, we're going to get you set up for your trading day with not official government data, but private jobs data on deck. That's coming up next. Get you set up for your trading day. First up, earnings from McDonald's before the bell. Then we'll hear from Qualcomm after the market close. And ADP employment data that comes at 8:15 a.m. Eastern might take on more importance given the absence of government data. Plus, the Supreme Court will be hearing challenges to President Trump's tariffs. That kicks off at 10 a.m. It is a market that is continuing to sag. Some of the losses pre-market in the future session are picking up after yesterday's more than 1% decline. We're down just over a third of 1%, but it is a ever so flight to havens. But the dollar is stronger, as are 10 years. The yield drops by not even 1 basis point. All right, that is it for Bloomberg Brief. Surveillance takes things from here. You're watching Bloomberg TV.